Well, hello there. Welcome to the second, call it Ramblings of a Madman or Ramblings of Justin. And of course, some of you are going to say, what's the difference? And you're not wrong. You're not wrong. That's a fair critique. So I think today I want to tackle the power of belief. This is something I've been thinking about for a while. You should know that my mind works. First of all, I'm a squirrel chaser. I love to chase squirrels down rabbit holes. And I'm also a very tangential thinker. So seemingly disparate, disconnected ideas I will bring together. And some of you may find it challenging to follow that. My wife does. She tells me all the time that she cannot follow my train of thinking. So if you are struggling with that, that's on me, not you. So just something on that. Also, I'm not pretending to be an expert on these ideas or these thoughts, these concepts. These are things that I am journeying through, working through, thinking about, wrestling with. You're going to hear this repeated over and over and over again, both here and on Spiritual Musings with Reagan. But we've entered a time, and I'll get into this in another video on the sort of the era or the age that I think we've entered in. But we're at the beginning part of a totally new era. And it's going to be marked by the fact that there's no experts. So the things I'm talking to you about, I am talking to myself about. I am, again, wondering about all that good stuff. So I don't want it to come off as like, oh, I've got all the answers. I am not looking to be your next guru. So my fondest hope in all of this is to spark thought, to hopefully spark a deeper connection to the divine, a deeper connection to God. If you're a Christian, hopefully to the Trinity. So the way you do it, how much of, anything that I say, you actually, absorb or adopt, that's not my goal. My goal would be for you to ponder the deep, beautiful mysteries of the universe and of our Creator. So there you go. All right. Power of belief, baby. Here we go. There's a saying that I believe I've got this basically right, that Tesla, the genius, Nikola Tesla said, and he said the entire universe can be understood through three things. You probably have heard this, right? Frequency, vibration, and energy. Frequency, vibration, and energy. Okay. So I believe that God, especially if you're coming from a Judeo-Christian type of point of view, God created everything. I think that's just logical anyways, that there has to be a source, if you want to call it source, some entity that lives outside of space and time that created or at least started the process, right? That just makes sense. Okay. And it had to have been done through vibration, frequency, and energy. That's what it makes sense. Okay. But vibration, frequency, and energy aren't just random, coming from nowhere effects. They have to come from intention, right? There has to be intent. And intention, I believe, comes from intelligence, or the word I'm going to like to use in this, because I think it's a higher, even better word than intelligence. It comes from consciousness, right? So you hear in the Judeo-Christian world, you'll hear intelligent design when it comes to the creation of the universe, for instance, which is great. But I think that consciousness is potentially the higher level of thing that we're talking about that goes beyond what we think of as just intelligence, which is sort of smarts. Okay. And consciousness, by the way, is as much a mystery to me as it is to any and everybody else. Like, it is a mystery, right? But it is also there and real. Like, crazy. Okay. So if everything that you see originated from consciousness, and the way it was then created, of course, was through vibration, frequency, and energy. And there's a little poetic there's a little poetic saying that I've invented that says we were created by a creative creator to create. All right. So in that is we were created. In other words, we're not a random accident of particles coming together over time, but we were meant to be here. We're an intentional creation. So we are created by a creative creator, right? So there would be a world in which, or a universe in which, I guess, the creator was like the mad scientist, no real intention, just like mixing and matching and making stuff in the lab, and then the lab explodes, and this all sort of happens. I don't think that was how it works. I think a creative creator, and especially one who's not obsessed with controlling everything, would set up a creation that could evolve, that could change, that could adapt, that could grow within a boundary, but sort of on its own, right? Which is essentially how we see much of the universe, right? There's things happening and it's morphing and changing all the time, but within boundaries. All right. So that's that. So we were created by a creative creator to create. That's the part that I think is so interesting about humans, right? So if you read in Genesis and throughout the Old Testament, the Tanakh, then you will come to this conclusion that maybe, just maybe, out of all the creations, both the more material creations like us, or the more supernal or supernatural spirit-based creations like the Elohim and angels and seraphims and all that fun stuff, those creations, which are interdimensional, they're not of this, material. And then those of us that are of this material, out of all of that creation, only us who sort of span those two worlds, right? Because we're both, I believe humans are uniquely both divine, like spiritual, and material. I believe we're between the two worlds. We're the bridge between the material and the supernatural. That's a whole other discussion, for another time. We won't chase that squirrel today. But one of our most godlike or divine attributes, I believe, is that we have the ability and the desire to create. Okay. So, if that's true, then through consciousness, intention, and then frequency, energy, and vibration, I believe we have the power to create. And I don't just mean like create a house or an iPhone or whatever it is, a new computer program or AI or, whatever, a cup, like my beautiful cup that I'm drinking. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee real quick. So delicious. Okay, so not just that kind of creation, but what if we have the power through our beliefs to actually change states of being in the world? And that's what's interesting to me for this discussion. And it's fascinating because if you read throughout the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, as we would call it in Christian world, or if you read through the New Testament, the words of Jesus and the disciples, there's a lot of, belief, the encouragement to believe, only believe and have faith. And, all of these encouragements seem to be over and over and over again through both the Tanakh and through the New Testament. And I think that's really fascinating. And it's hard for me to say exactly what I thought that meant, but I kind of just thought that always meant like God was encouraging you to believe in him for whatever reason. For whatever reason God wants you to believe in him, because he needs you to, he wants you to, it's good for you, whatever. And while that's also probably true and wonderful, I wonder if it's also touching at something deeper. If it's touching at the fact that if you do believe, that then becomes real. Or at least it affects the trajectory of reality. That's my little theory, my little thesis I'm working on here with this talk. All right. Okay, so we're created to create. I do want to interject here. I've obviously had this thought that like if all of us are empowered through our consciousness and our beliefs, our intention to create, there could become chaos. So there's a whole bunch of limitations on this as well. So I imagine that there's probably some sort of box. It's a big box, I would imagine, but some sort of big box that God has said, you know what, little human, thou shalt not create outside of this box, right? That's God as an Englishman. So the big box might be you can affect and change everything within this box, but you can't affect, for instance, maybe God would limit us from being able to affect the speed at which the Earth spins, or its rotation around the sun and are hurtling through space in our little solar system, right? Okay, so maybe God would say that you can't mess with that. And that would be good, right? Because we want the sun to come up every morning and all that stuff. But then within our box, he's like, hey, you guys are the stewards. This is your responsibility. You're the owners. I've given you, here's a good word, a good KJV word that I was taught, dominion, right? We were given dominion over our space. So within our box, within our allowed space, we can make changes. We can affect change. Power of belief. This is what this is coming back to. Okay. So there's two kinds of powers of belief. There's the one kind of power of belief. The ancients and our forefathers had very different ideas, for instance, of like what the earth looked like and what the stars and the sun and all this stuff, like how it all worked. And you saw even the more ancient, I would see pictures of like somebody like basically holding up the sky, like there was these two figures holding up the sky, and they generally thought of the earth more as a flat or circular type of place. You saw that imagery a lot. And even the Catholic Church in the last couple thousand years, as astronomers started figuring out that, hey, the earth is round and it's a sphere and we're actually not the center of the universe. They got very angry with them. Some people went to jail. They were persecuted. I think some people even got killed for this stuff because, you can't have new ideas and truth getting out there. That would be no good. So anyways, but as long as you really believed that the earth was different than we conceive of it now, in a sense, in a quantum sort of way, in an alternate reality sort of way, it's true. Because if everybody generally believes that, then that's the structure in which you operate, as if. And I will say this is a side note. It's another squirrel that I'm not going to chase right now. But I have learned in my life, in my journey, my spiritual journey, coming up very fundamentalist. I shared with you guys before, I was raised in a very fundamentalist Christian background. God would confirm to me and to everybody I knew in that little cult that I was raised in, would confirm to us all the things that we believed about the Bible and about God over and over and over again. And our little revelations and the things that we would share with each other to encourage each other. And we were having real conversations with God as best as we could. I believe that with all my heart. It was always confirming of the paradigm, the box within which we lived, because our belief system created a space where God mostly only spoke to us in ways that confirmed or matched, because we wouldn't have listened. If God tries to talk to you outside of your paradigm, you'll think, it's a demon, or you'll think you're having doubt, or you're being disillusioned by, your brain or whatever. You just won't pay attention. So in general, God will speak to you within the paradigm within which you're comfortable. So again, we're not going to chase that too much right now, but that's what I believe. That's an example of believing something that is different than reality. And you could argue that reality doesn't change, but your reality reflects what you believe. An example, I think, of when your internal reality begins to radically affect the outward reality. I've never heard anybody take this take on the Garden of Eden, but here you go, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Let me, another good sip of coffee. Let me tell you about what my take on what might be going on, not 100% here, but this is an alternate take on what might have been happening in the Garden of Eden. Okay, so you know the story. Adam and Eve in the garden, everything's lovely and wonderful in their little garden, and there's only one thing that God tells them, don't eat of the tree, right? Of knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat of that one tree. The Christians think it's an apple. The Jews think it's a fig. Because it's the Jewish Bible, I'm going to go with them. So it's a fig. So one day the little snaky snake comes and has a chatty chat with Miss Eve, and Miss Eve gets convinced that it would be a good idea for her to have the same level of awareness that God has. And so she grabs a fig, and her and Adam, they eat. And you would think, the way that I was told the story, that immediately upon eating this, that's when death sets in. That's when they're kicked out of the garden. That's when all the bad things happen. Except if you read the story, that's not exactly what happens. They're still in the garden. And yet this beautiful ritual that God would come down, Hashem would come down every day and would interact with Adam and Eve and would talk to them about their day, and they would just like hang out in, like, it says the cool of the day. So maybe that was like dusk, and it was kind of like, yeah, it was just like this. You just can imagine you're in paradise, and literally your creator takes form as a person and comes to walk in the garden with you. Like, how freaking brilliant and beautiful is that? And yet after this eating of the fig, Adam and Eve are introduced to, in my estimation, they must have been introduced to shame. This idea that I'm not good, that I'm disgusting. My nakedness is no longer, because, they were naked. So their nakedness goes from being beautiful and vulnerable and authentic to being gross and disgusting and shameful. And they look at God and they say, oh, in God's eyes, I'm also shameful and disgusting. And therefore they hide. So they hide, and they, that was the conversation that, God goes walking, goes looking for them, and they're hiding. And then after that is when they lose the garden. So in Justin's thesis, I wonder if the power of their belief to say that their relationship with God had gone from one of pure, wonderful, naked and transparent and open to one of covering and shame and hiding, that they were granted what they believed, i.e., their way of thinking, the delusion of their way of thinking in their mind. God granted them what they were thinking, what they were believing, and took them out of the perfect place, because they could no longer be in the perfect place with delusion, and put them into a much more broken and hard place. So that would be an example of, whether you believe that the Garden of Eden was a physical place or more of like a spiritual setting, which I could be convinced of either one. I kind of like the spiritual one better personally right now. But anyways, you lose your space in that beautiful spiritual place once you start to believe you're yucky and gross. The truth of the matter didn't really change, but our belief system did, and we can lose that perfect space, that holy, beautiful space. And by perfect, I don't mean perfect in the gross term it's meant. I mean it as whole and complete and not lacking, not full of shame. Okay. Anyways, moving along. Next. Okay. So we got all that nailed down. Power of belief. We're going somewhere. I promise we're going somewhere. All right. There was a study I saw several years ago. The gentleman's name was Robert John, and I think he worked for something like the Princeton Labs or something like that. And he had computers doing random numbers or random image generation. And then he invited in some participants to begin to, from their thoughts, from consciousness, to begin to focus on certain outcomes, certain images, certain numbers, whatever. And all of a sudden, these computers that were before statistically truly random were being swayed to where they were now tilting towards the direction of whatever the human participants were wanting or were thinking about. Now, no one's saying they were getting it 100% of the time or anything, but if you were going from like the coin flip, 50-50, heads or tails, and you're starting to tilt it to where now it's 55% or whatever the number is, whatever the tilt is, that's significant. And that's what happened. So this gets into that very interesting world again of what I'm talking about. If the power of our belief, if what we believe can actually affect even something like a computer, right? Which is, depending on what you think about computers, whatever, is just an inanimate object. I mean, it's powered by electricity and all that stuff, but it's not a conscious being. Not yet anyways, right? Not a conscious being. This was several years ago. I believe this was before AI. Could be wrong on that, but it was years ago. Anyways, the power of our belief and consciousness to affect a computer gives you a little clue because it's so testable, right? This is a great experiment to see how we affect reality, how we affect basically a machine. Another little side note here as I'm building my case here, ladies and gentlemen, for power of belief. So I am a avid podcast listener. I've been an addict, podcast addict for many, many years. And one of my recent favorite ones, many of you probably already know about this. If you haven't listened yet to Telepathy Tapes, it is freaking fantastic. High level, the idea behind Telepathy Tapes is they discovered that nonverbal autistic children have developed these, what they think of as psych abilities to do all these things that us normals don't know that we can do, don't think we can do. And in my personal opinion, like telepathy, of course, hence Telepathy Tapes. But anyways, so these nonverbal autistics are engaging in what seems to be supernatural powers or extra powers that we as normals don't typically seem to have. My idea on that specifically is that these nonverbal autistic young people are probably tapped into stuff that we all have, but because they don't have the ability to speak or function as well as we do, we've become consumed with more of the material world. And because they don't have as much access to that, their other powers have developed. Kind of like blind people hear really well, deaf people maybe see really well, so on and so forth. Okay. Again, we're not going to chase that squirrel too much. Telepathy Tapes. Now, I believe Telepathy Tapes, the first season is 10 episodes. Go listen to them. It's fantastic. It'll blow your mind. Then comes what's called talk tracks after the first 10 episodes. And talk tracks are, they're just like continuations of different conversations, but not in the same flow. Talk track number 9 specifically, I'm almost positive that's the right one. So talk track number 9, the guy that the lady Kai, who is doing the podcast, she interviews him and he talks about that study that I was talking about with Robert John in the Princeton labs. He's talking about that study really got him thinking. So he went to recreate it and he was able to. And he was doing the same thing. He was getting computers to, among other things, do ones and zeros, random generation, kind of again like the coin flip. If you leave them alone, roughly 50% of the time it's 0, roughly 50% of the time it's 1, just like the coin flip. If you do it 1,000 times, roughly 500 is going to go one way, 500 to go the other. Pretty standard stuff. Again, you bring in human participants who through consciousness and intention begin to change the outcome. Again, not 100% of the time does it go to heads or tails, but it begins to drift. You begin to make an effect. And then here's the one that I thought was super cool, which again is another little rabbit that we won't chase too much. But he discovered that a participant was able to affect random number generation in the past and random number generation in the future. Totally wild, which gets into the whole world of the quantumness of time. And if you're stepping into other dimensions, time doesn't work as linearly as it does in the fourth dimension. Totally amazing and wild. I love that stuff. This is where I geek out. This is my playground. I love this stuff. Anywho, okay, so this is a great sort of pseudo or I think of scientific proof that we have the ability to affect the world around us. Okay, power of belief. I do want to come back to, I mentioned earlier, I think that there must be some sort of cosmic God-placed box on how far our belief systems can go, because then we could screw up the whole universe. I don't think he would let us. And the other part is, I don't know how he synthesizes all the different, like you, I'm pointing at myself. Yeah. You and I may have very different belief systems and desires. And so if we're all having like competing and different and contrary desires, how does all that get synthesized? That's a great question. I don't have an answer for. I have a theory, though, that if each unit of desire, of consciousness, of intention is measured, and you compare the weight of good intention, 1 unit of good to 1 unit of bad, my theory is that every unit of good far, far, far outweighs the unit of bad. And you say to me, Justin, how did you come to this conclusion? See, you like that? I like leaned in and lowered my voice a little bit. It's very dramatic stuff. Okay. I come to it because of the light-dark analogy, which is all, again, through the Tanakh, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Light and dark, there's obviously no competition. There is no place, the darkest place in the world, underground, in a cave, in the ocean, far below sunlight. If you take the littlest bit of light, it's going to repel the darkness in that area. Now, it still may be dark out beyond that, so you have to use stronger and stronger light if you want to light everything. But the littlest bit of light will always overcome the darkness in that area, right? That we all know that instinctually. That makes sense. Ooh, another sip of coffee. Important. So good. Delicious Nicaraguan coffee. Okay, so I don't know, again, how all of our different competing beliefs get synthesized, but I think that those of us who believe in good, even if there's technically fewer of us or fewer of those thoughts, they far outweigh in weight per, if there's a way to measure, I know, how do you come up with a unit of measurement for belief, right? Who knows? Whatever. But you get where I'm going. I believe each one of those is stronger than darkness. That's it. That's all I'm trying to say, people. Okay. Take a breath. It's all okay. So where this leads me, and this is the journey I'm on in trying to wrestle with this and basically trying to believe in the idea of belief myself, is how much can I change of my insides, my inside world? Because I believe very, very strongly that heaven and hell, as we think of it in our modern Western Christian context, is not something that happens in the future. It's something that is happening to us right now, and it's our inside world. You, my friend, are either living in the shalom or you're living in torment. You're either living in paradise or you're living in Sheol. You are living in heaven or you're living in hell. Those are the two options. That's your inside world, right? And I'm not saying there can't be a mix of, and I'm not saying, whatever, but it's this, in the deepest part of you, that's where heaven and hell are. Okay, just my belief. So what happens if I begin to believe and begin to change what is inside to heaven, to shalom? And then how does that begin to affect the world around me, my relationships, my life experience, and even the broader reality and structures and all of that around me? That's where I'm fascinated by. 99.99999% of Christians and Jews, I'm going to share with you my most controversial belief. Here you go. This is it. Right out of the gate. Second video I've done on this thing. And I'm already going to tell you the most controversial thing I believe. And I want to give you so much permission to not agree with me, because 99.999999999% of all Christians and all Jews and Muslims would totally not agree with this, right? Not going to agree with this at all. So if you don't agree with me, and you don't have to, you're in good company. Very good company. But unlike the Jews and Christians, and I don't know as much about the Muslims, but I believe it's the same for them, they're waiting on a Messiah to come at some point and make this world better. It's a very long story. It's another, it needs to be a whole series, but God led me through this whole crazy thing years ago, very slowly taking away the idea of first the end times and then of the idea that he was coming back to rescue. And so we can get into that later, but the big takeaway for this discussion is not to get into weeds in that, but just I really believe that even if you believe there's a Messiah coming at some point, that you still need to believe in we are the actual rescue plan, right? We are the restorers of the world. That's the beautiful tikkun olam, is the Jewish saying that says we are the restorers. We are the restorers of the world. I love tikkun olam. I love that as an ethic, that we, me and you and I, the capital letter W, we, the grand we, if you will, we are the restorers because we've been given dominion. We have been given stewardship. We have ownership, a responsibility, whatever your favorite word is, for what happens in our lives, in our internal space, in the way we interact with others, and then in the planet, this planet. And I do believe, again, another squirrel, I do believe that as we get ourselves together here, that we're also going to positively affect the cosmos as well. Again, another rabbit, another squirrel I will not chase. I shall not. Okay. But if our beliefs begin to change our inside world, and we begin to believe that instead of I'm a broken, dirty, yucky person and I'm going to hide from God, but I'm going to come out of hiding, and then I'm going to look at myself and my own nakedness as not shameful. And I'm not ashamed to stand in the presence of God, right? And for those of you who are being literal, I'm not talking about, running around in a nudist colony, although if you want to do that, I have no problems with that. I'm just saying I'm using, actual nakedness with, I have a sense of humor, and I know that not everybody gets humor and irony and sarcasm. So I'm going to try to hold that back as best as I can, but that's my love language. Sorry, it just is. So I'll try to explain. But you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about nakedness and the deeply vulnerable sense of the word. So if you begin to get that part straightened out, how does that affect your inside world? And if you begin in your inside world to feel like you're now in heaven, and this is heaven right now, inside, no matter what's going on around the world. I'm not saying the external. You forget about what's going on out there. If what's going inside is shalom, if you're at peace and at rest, which, again, another squirrel that I won't chase for this time, but was the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. That's not true. The greatest thing that's ever happened to me is my wife and my kids. But short of that, the greatest thing that's ever happened to me on a very, very personal level was discovering true peace. It is magical. I would wish it on everyone. And that's when you discover shalom, heaven inside of you. Okay. So then that can begin to transmute and transmit to the world around you, and you begin to affect around you. So that's the first belief. And then again, if your belief is that your inside world can be changed, and now, oh wow, I can walk around with shalom in here. What does that mean for all of my interactions? And then what does that mean for the larger world? And many of us have concerns about things in the bigger world. If you're an American like I am, you've seen this country which has had a lot of these institutions that were once amazing. We were so ahead technologically. We were so ahead. We were the first in a very, very long time, the first to do a democracy. We've been leading the way in that. But we've seen our government, even our infrastructure systems, our education system, our medical system. For me, one of the things I'm passionate about, which we'll decide how much to get into, I was really hurt by the judicial system. And so that's a passion of mine, is that I want to make that a better system for people that of those of us that are in America. But wherever your focus is, whatever you're called to, whatever you have this burden in your heart to fix, like, do you caring about it, or does you caring about it, does it have the ability to affect? And I think for a long time, what we've believed, I can say for myself, it was like, I kind of believed that we were like NPCs. I think that's the non-player characters, I think is the word, for in a video game where you're like running around. It's kind of programmed. There's very little the NPC can do to affect the game, right? That's kind of how it's been presented to me, how I felt in talking to people, even good Christians, whatever. Like, it's very little effect. I've gotten to know my Jewish brethren better lately in the last couple of years, and I think they believe they have the ability to make more of an effect than Christians do. But I would imagine they even feel like there's a limit until Messiah comes. But that's what I would love to propose is what if, and this is where I'll try to land the plane, what if the power of our belief starts to change our inside world? That inside world then begins to affect those closest to us and the things around us. What we literally, you've heard law of attraction, what we're attracting into our life, the way that we experience reality. If you're feeling like everything's dark, everything's horrible, we're going into a terrible place, that's how you'll perceive your world. Is it reality or is it your created reality? That's a separate issue. But either way, if you believe that everything's going to hell in a handbasket, which most of us do, most of us in this country anyways do, then it shall be so. And if you decide to come along on the journey with me, I'm going to try to help us be counterintuitive, to swim up against the stream, right? And what if things are actually getting better? What if things are actually getting brighter? What if the chaos that we're seeing is because we're changing into a new era and we're all just trying to figure this thing out and none of us are experts anymore and the systems that we used to be in are no longer working, not chasing all those rabbits. So what if the power of belief can change? And again, like these experiments with changing the computer, we're not trying to change 100% of the time. We're just trying to tip the balance, tip it a little bit, tip it in our favor. And I was having a conversation with God a couple of years ago about this, and I was like, if I start sharing these things, they're going to think, first of all, I'm crazy. How can I get many people to believe or understand what the heck it is I'm trying to say when I can barely understand what it is that I'm trying to say? And I felt like I got the number 10%. And I don't know what that means. Does that mean 10% of the entire world's population? Does that mean 10% of people who are people of faith? I don't know. But I have a feeling that all it takes is 10% to begin to believe that we're not waiting on a rescue plan from an outside force, some sort of Messiah, to fix this. That Messiah is actually here with us now, and that this beautiful God, this Trinity that I believe in, has empowered us to begin to create the world we want to see. Like there's something in us that knows we want things to be better, to improve. And that if we continue to believe that it's not improving and there's nothing we can do to improve it, then we shall have exactly what we believe. But if we begin to believe that we are empowered beings, we are created by a creative creator to create, and we have the ability to create through the vibration, energy, and what's the other one? Vibration, energy, and frequency, jeepers. If we begin to push into the good and to the positive and into what the divine design has for us and partner with that, then we can actually see first our inner world change, then the world just around us change, and then ultimately the broader world to begin to change. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's my big thoughts for today. If you stuck with this, God bless you. If you understood and followed half of what I said, God bless you more. Thank you so much for joining me.